what you just heard from a sitting congressman is quite possibly the most radical, violence inducing, mob inciting, insurrectionist, unconstitutional, un American election tampering language that I've heard ever in my life. And yes, that is, in fact, a dead squirrel on his head. Now, you may be absolutely shocked at this choice of Tim Walz, and you may be thinking, okay, this is good news for Trump. This actually makes the Trump-Vance ticket look a little better in certain regions. Maybe today is a bright spot for the direction of the election. Maybe Trump is going to win the Electoral College election in November, and he'll be inaugurated next January. You may be thinking that. But Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, well, he's not having any of it. In a video of an appearance he gave at a bookstore in Washington, D.C., and I'll give you details on that bookstore in a moment, Jamie Raskin revealed exactly what he and other mainstream Democrats in Washington, D.C. are planning post-election day should Donald Trump prevail.
Again, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient because what can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with a magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress. So it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025, to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then we need bodyguards for everybody in Civil War conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means. And I'm glad that Sherilyn's creating her new center so we can bring that again.
Okay, so we're going to break this down bit by bit, but I just want you to know overall what you just heard from a sitting congressman is quite possibly the most radical, violence-inducing, mob-inciting, insurrectionist, unconstitutional, un-American election tampering language that I've heard ever in my life. And these are the people who lecture you about grandma walking through a door at the Capitol held open by a police officer on January 6th. Jamie Raskin, one of the architects of the January 6th committee, who thinks you're the radical, just says that we'll break down exactly what he said here. First, quickly about the setting. First of all, Jamie Raskin is a congressman from Maryland. He lives in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is literally right across the street from the Washington, D.C. border. So he may tell you he's from Maryland. I think, in fact, he was born in Washington, D.C., but he realized that being a D.C. resident, he'd never get power. And he's a radical left-wing socialist, and he wants power. So he moves to Maryland. He became a state senator in Maryland, then ran for Congress, and he thought about running for Senate this last time around too, but decided he liked his power in the House of Representatives. He, of course, also was one of the House managers for the impeachments of Donald Trump. And yes, you've seen him now as the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. He is very powerful. He also hates you. He hates Trump, he hates Republicans, and he hates people who vote and support Trump and Republicans. He thinks you're a fascist. This setting is a bookstore called Politics and Prose. It's on Connecticut Avenue in Northwest D.C. It's a bookstore where people go wearing their Birkenstocks and their bandanas, and they have just had their gummies or maybe just smoked pot, and they sit around and they talk about Marxism while reading books and drinking lattes. It's Politics and Prose. And this was some sort of book event, as you can see. Now, I want to break down exactly what Jamie Raskin just threatened. And make no mistake, this is a threat. And the kind of assassination porn language that he is floating out there so nonchalantly and casually with that what looks like the skin of a dead squirrel on his head is so absolutely outrageous that he literally, seriously, quite sincerely should be censored by the House of Representatives for this. This is beyond volatile, what he's suggesting.
And it's necessary, but it's not sufficient because what can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with.
All right. So Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, of course, was passed after the Civil War. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that any person who held elected office or was an officer of the United States federal government before the Civil War and then or helped mount an insurrection or rebellion against the U.S. government cannot then hold office as a representative or officer of the federal government after leading an insurrection or rebellion. That's what he's talking about. Now, there's a couple of problems with this. First of all, and least of which, the president of the United States is not an officer of the federal government. So there's no possible way that the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment would apply to the president of the United States who wins an election, number one. But number two, there was no insurrection or rebellion on January 6th. I know you hear insurrection all the time from Jake Tapper and George Stephanopoulos and other idiots in the media. But do you know how I know for a fact that there was no insurrection on January 6th? Do you? Do you know how you can know for a fact that there was no insurrection on January 6th? I'm going to tell you. Because there have been over 1,000 people arrested from the events of January 6th. And charges were even brought by Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, against Donald Trump for his actions on January 6th. And of all of those charges, the 1,000 people who were charged by the Justice Department with unlimited budgets to charge those people with whatever crime they found, and with the charges that Jack Smith laid against Donald Trump for his actions on January 6th, not one of them have been charged with insurrection. Not one. Not one. Insurrection against the United States, insurrection against the federal government is in fact a crime. If anybody broke that law on January 6th, do you think anyone from the Biden-Garland Justice Department would hesitate to bring those charges against them? Not one person, including Donald J. Trump, has been charged with insurrection. But Mr. Raskin, he thinks that he can trigger what he calls civil war conditions by exercising the third clause of the 14th Amendment, which deals specifically with people who lead an insurrection or rebellion against the United States. But we got to break this down even further about how outrageous and despicable what Jamie Raskin is doing here.
The magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress. So it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025, to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then
So it's going to be up to us to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. I just want you to think this through, because the idiot Marxists at Politics and a Prose can't quite figure this out. But if, in fact, Jamie Raskin and his partners in crime in the House of Representatives and the Senate want to exercise the Clause 3 of the 14th Amendment to say that Donald Trump is disqualified from the presidency and he wants to hold back the rampaging Trump mobs in 2025 January to make sure that that happens, the only way that scenario exists is if Donald Trump wins the election in November. Right? I mean, there's no reason to invoke the 14th Amendment on January 6, 2025 if Donald Trump loses the election. So Jeremy Raskin here is flippantly and chuckling away as he muses about what he intends to do the first week of January 2025 under the scenario that Donald Trump has legitimately won the election, that the people of the United States of America have elected him as their duly elected 47th president of the United States. This is this fantasy that Jeremy Raskin is imagining for himself, standing astride the doors of the House of Representatives, keeping back the rampaging mobs, the hordes of Trump supporters, as he negates an election, as he reverses single-handedly the presidential election of 2024. Do you realize how warped and sick this man is? Every single thing they always say about you and about Trump is actually true of them. You know this by now. The fact that his brain can even imagine, let alone fantasize, as he is right now, about this moment happening, tells you what a totalitarian he is and what his views of the Constitution and the American people are. Because the only way he plays this out is if you overwhelmingly vote for Donald Trump and Donald Trump wins the election. But he's saying, nah, it's not good enough. Sorry, we're going to have to keep you down. And don't you love the language he uses about the American citizens who vote for Trump? Rampaging hordes of Trump supporters. But a little bit more here.
Then we need bodyguards for everybody in Civil War conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them.
Civil War conditions. Listen to what this man is saying. Do I need to remind anybody that it is less than 4 weeks from an assassination attempt of Donald Trump? And he is flippantly, casually, half jokingly using this kind of language, that if Trump wins, we will face civil war conditions in this country? Is there anything more irresponsible, reckless than this kind of absolute absurdity? But you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene's the problem. Matt Gaetz is the problem. These people are demonic. One other thing, he now pivots and says, but it's all the Supreme Court's fault, right?
But these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means. And I'm glad that Sherilyn's creating her new center.
Yeah. So not only does he basically call for civil war conditions because Trump is going to win the election, and then say that he's going to single-handedly, along with his pals in Congress, invoke the 14th Amendment and negate the presidential election and say that Trump is not qualified. But he blames it all on the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court where the justices have now had to hire their own personal private security to keep themselves safe and keep their homes safe, where one of the justices actually was under threat of a legitimate kidnapping and assassination attempt, where, thank God, the man has been arrested and thrown in jail. But Justice Kavanaugh actually had to face the potential of he and his family being kidnapped and assassinated. And this guy is flippantly saying, yeah, you know, the Supreme Court, they don't do their jobs and they're fine with violence in this country. He's calling for violence in this country. This is Jamie Raskin. And he's a sweetheart. He's a darling of the Democrats. I wouldn't be surprised Kamala Harris makes him as her attorney general if she wins. Here's Jamie Raskin.
Never before in American history had a president called for a crowd to come contest the counting of electoral votes by Congress, or engaged in any effort designed to influence, delay, or obstruct the joint session of Congress in doing its work required by our Constitution and the Electoral Count Act. I have an objection because 10 of the 29 electoral votes cast by Florida were cast by electors not lawfully certified because they violated Florida's prohibition against dual office holding.
Debate is out of order.
Yeah, that's Jamie Raskin, January 6th of 2017, trying to stand in the way of Donald Trump becoming president that day. Now, he wasn't invoking Clause 3 of the 14th Amendment. Instead, he was pulling something else out of his squirrely little butt. But Jamie Raskin tried to keep Trump from being president then. And now he swears to do the same thing again. One more little scene from this event at Politics and Prose in DC.
Well, last night I was most worried about the Supreme Court's prospective imminent abdication of its very clear duty to disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and what that might mean if their decision says that it's really up to Congress on January 5th or January 6th, 2025, to disqualify him at the counting of the Electoral College votes, which really could lead to something akin to civil war, if that's what the suggestion is, which is what I think I heard when I went to the oral argument, that they themselves were unwilling to rule whether or not the Colorado Supreme Court was correct in finding that he had engaged in insurrection on January 6, 2021. So, but that was just last night's worry. So that,
once again, using all of this violent language, this violent imagery of civil war and Trump mobs and violence and everything that he's fantasizing about on January 6, 2025, as he stands in the way of the duly elected president actually being certified by the Electoral College vote. Something I've been told recently was pretty un-American, unpatriotic, and insurrection-y. Now, let me just take a quick moment here to do something that the Right Honorable Congressman Jamie Raskin apparently can't find it in himself to do, and that's be reasonable and speak calm at a time where things are a little tense in this country. I will remind you that it was less than 4 weeks ago that an assassin's bullet came a quarter inch away from shattering Donald Trump's skull. The language that the left has employed about Donald Trump for the last 10 years, let alone the last 10 weeks, has created a climate of fear and loathing and division and, yes, violence in this country. Jamie Raskin and his party and his leadership will tell you that Donald Trump is an existential threat to the future of this country, that if he is elected, we will never have another election in this country, that he will act as an authoritarian and a dictator. And that's why we must thwart our Constitution, thwart our democratic norms, and do whatever it takes, no matter how unconstitutional and undemocratic it is, to keep him from being president. And when he envisions the possibility of Donald Trump winning in November, he now invokes images like civil war conditions and violent hordes of Trump mobs being violently held back because he is unconstitutionally invoking the 14th Amendment to say that Donald Trump is disqualified. Well, let me be the grown-up in the room. You would think a sitting congressman would take on that role, but no, it's up to me, your good old pal Larry at Town Hall Media, doing this fabulous stream for you right now. I'll be the mature grown-up in the room. What Jamie Raskin just said, what you heard Jamie Raskin envision, is never, ever going to happen. And Jamie Raskin should say that. He should be honest with you. But he doesn't want to be honest with you. He doesn't want to cool things down. He doesn't want you to not be scared. He doesn't want you to feel like we have a sound system in this country. He doesn't want you to think that the Constitution will prevail. He wants you on edge. He wants you angry. He wants you violent. He's begging for it. But you're better than that. We're reasonable. You see, there's something else in the 14th Amendment that Jamie Raskin isn't sharing with you. To invoke the 14th Amendment, to disqualify Donald Trump after he wins the election in November, Jamie Raskin needs 2/3 of the House of Representatives, and he needs 2/3 of the United States Senate. This is never, ever, ever in Jamie Raskin's wildest dreams ever going to happen. And you deserve to know that. You deserve to take a breath. And you deserve to look at Jamie Raskin with absolute disdain. He is a tiny, angry little man. And he will never amount to anything more than being the congressman from his little angry socialist district in Maryland, where, yes, he wields power, but that's as far as it goes. And yes, that is, in fact, a dead squirrel on his head.